Buju, wago shindagu migizi indodem, gazaga squaji mekag, indun jaba.
Bonjour. Kwe maji tayan ni wi Ojibwe, bungi we wenigo da windamunugu awian, wagosh, hindagu minawa migizi indodem, chiwasawad, hishkonigan, wenjabayan, gazaga squaji mekag. Minawa ni minwenda mapaji as yiwabandiyang, we ganodamung, dawaj gejichigang da we do kawangwa, ungo Wanitaasowin. English? French? Deutsch? I will do my best in English tonight, since I think after Ojibwe that's my best language and will be easiest for our communication. I first of all want to thank all of you for coming tonight and thinking about such an important topic that really should not be taboo. In fact, the word taboo itself comes from an indigenous language. In fact, the languages across Polynesia use a variation of the word taboo. In Fiji and Tonga, it's tapu. In Hawaii, it's kapu. And it doesn't mean forbidden, it means spirit. So how come we have come to understand that spirit is a forbidden subject when it is something that affects every one of us in so many different ways? And it is part of a healthy society to make space to have these conversations and to share understandings around them. I gave you a brief introduction in my Ojibwe language, not because I expected to be understood, but because people who are smarter, older, wiser than me say when you go somewhere new, then introduce yourself with our native language. Tell them your native name. So my native name is Wagosh, which means fox. Tell them your clan. And in our tribal culture, the clan is not just a word for your family. It is a symbol for your house, so to speak, but it's also a spiritual guide. So I come from the Eagle clan, and I come from Leech Lake, and I'll explain a little bit more about myself as we get going here tonight too. And then I wanted to do this too, thinking about what's really, truly important. And I was asked by the organizers for the conference to share a little bit about my culture and some of our ways for talking about death and dying, and also grief and grieving. Not because we would appropriate one another's cultures, but because we have so much to learn from one another. I've never met a human being on planet Earth who is not my superior in some way. Every one of us has something to teach, and every one of us has something to learn. One of the things that I find very different is I've been lucky enough to travel to many, many different places and witness many different cultures around this topic, is that in our custom, when there's a funeral, for example, instead of having someone come in and speak simply to the living, sometimes chastising us for not coming to church or things like this, and sometimes offering kind words, and often also reading from a script. For us, the officiating crew at a funeral sits with the family, and they speak to the departing soul. And the whole ceremony is for the one who's what we call, in translation, changing worlds. And there is a section where we also speak to the family about tools for dealing with grief. And I'll share a few of these with you tonight. But one of them includes that it's not so much that we have souls, it's more like we are souls. We have bodies for a little while. We're not humans looking for a spiritual experience. We are spirits having a temporary human experience. And even in our language, we don't actually have a word for goodbye. There is a parting, gikawabamin, which means I'll see you. Gikawabamin minawa, I'll see you again. Even if I meet someone here and there's no obvious time that we will connect again in this world, it's still see you again in this world or the next. And it's an affirmation of our ever-living spiritual presence. And so in one of the books that I wrote, The Cultural Toolbox, I think I might preface this by saying, as Native American people, we get all kinds of stereotypes, right? Most of the stories most people hear are from before 1900, and it's a story with a tragic ending. And so it surprises people. Someone said, it's a shame they killed all the Indians. I said, wait a minute, I'm feeling pretty good today. But that's how deeply our consciousness is affected by all of these stories. As a Native person, one time I was giving a talk in France and someone was so excited. Monsieur, where are the real Indians? Where are the real Indians? I had to think about that one. I think this person was looking for beads, feathers, someone who stepped off the set from Dances with Wolves. So I said, well, where are the real Frenchmen? There's a castle across the road, but nobody's living in it. I don't see people on horses with shining armor for Charlemagne. I don't see people with berets and little pipes. Where are the real Frenchmen? So he's thinking for a minute. And then, of course, it occurred to him, some stereotype about what it meant to be French is not what it meant to be French. And a Frenchman could be French traveling in China. I said, of course. It's the same for us. I have many different clothes. There's a silhouette of me with my powwow outfit. Here I am, wearing a jacket. But what's on the inside is still there. So for all of us, you are a complete, fully realized human being. You are a soul who has a body. You are the one your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the generations. You have been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. One of my elders, Tom Stillday, was from the Red Lake Reservation in northwestern Minnesota, and he was the first person named chaplain for our state senate. And that was him with his pipe opening up the Senate. He was the first one who was named chaplain for the state Senate who was not from one of the Abrahamic religious traditions. So he was pretty fun too. He said, I'm praying for politicians. Boy, do they need it. And that was before all of the other crazy stuff you've seen in America over the past several years. We had him at our university to give a speech for our graduating students. And I wanted him to come because he was someone who helped steward people through life and through death. He officiated at traditional Ojibwe funerals. He was from a community where no one was ever baptized. Everybody follows traditional Ojibwe religious beliefs and practices. And so it was fun when we had him at the university. I said, you have 15 minutes, maybe throw in one or two good jokes, focus on the students, but we have a lot of stuff to do tonight. And he got up there and he wrecked the agenda. He spoke for an hour and a half. He did it all only in our tribal language. And then when he was done, he said, all you people who study Indians, study that. And he went and sat down. So I thought he was great. But he had many good points. Most of the books written about us were written by people who were not from our community. Most of the sources were, what did the white army officer write in his journal? There were no indigenous perspectives. It's also the same with the economic development plan, the suicide prevention plan, the school turnaround plan. And I think it's so healthy that we bring people together from many different backgrounds today to share our understandings, beliefs, and knowledge so we can truly learn from one another. A lot of us have been stuck in an echo chamber. And so this is very good. I'll start with a brief story. This is one of my elders, Betsy Schultz. She got the name Schultz because she married a Swiss guy who moved to Wisconsin. And she was always so kind to me. She'd kiss me on each cheek every time we saw each other. She'd hug me close. And she loved me in part because I spent so much time with her father. And I'll just skip one picture. Here was a picture of her father, Archie, who was born in 1901. He lived almost 100 years. And even his children were born in wigwams. And he was in his 30s the first time he ever saw a white man. And the first time he ever saw a car. Now, when I met him, he was in a small modern house watching WWF SmackDown, the professional wrestling, on the TV and laughing really loud. What a change he must have seen during his time. And I'll share a little bit of my journey with Archie today too, just briefly. But it was very different for me once I had connected with Archie. He couldn't really speak English that well. He just spoke our tribal language. He could speak some English, a little bit choppy. And so when I ended up living with him and spending so much time with him, it provided a kind of rare opportunity to be totally immersed in our tribal language and culture. And among the many services he provided for our people is he too officiated at traditional Ojibwe funerals and many life ceremonies too. And so as I was excited to just help him, I was made to drive him around, drive him to the funeral, carry in his water drum, carry in his pipe, and help. And I just wanted to be in the room, and I never thought it would take me anywhere, but it sure did. When he passed away, and this was in 1996, a year later, now we have, there was a year of ceremonies when somebody passes away. So it's not just at the funeral itself, but the family's in mourning for 1 year. And there was an ancient custom amongst our people when somebody had a death in the family. In former times, they used to take charcoal and rub it on their face to designate that they are grieving. And then they wouldn't show vanity, excessive vanity. So they wouldn't leave their hair tightly braided, but they would just let it hang down. People were hygienic, but careful not to show extra vanity. And on one of our ceremonial drums, the first person who is seated as a ceremonial drum chief, and this is just a picture of what one would look like, his son died. And he said, see, this new ceremony, new back then, hundreds of years ago, see, it's no good. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want anything to do with any of you. I quit. And he got up and moved to leave the dance hall. And the people stopped him. And they actually grabbed him by the hand, and they walked him all the way around the drum, and they put him back in his chair. And they said, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And what has happened to you is not the fault of the drum, nor anybody here, nor is it your fault. And they carefully washed the charcoal off of his face. And And then they carefully combed out his hair and rebraided his hair. They gave him a new set of clothes. And then one by one, everyone in the community came and gave him little gifts. A piece of cloth, a blanket. They piled up gifts as high as he was sitting. And he was crying. And so then they had 4 warriors get up and they sung a song for each one as they danced around him 4 times, and then they wiped his tears. And then the next one and the next one. They sang a 5th song, and they lifted him up, and they danced with him around the drum and brought him back into the circle of living. Now today, we typically don't put charcoal on our faces or leave our hair unbraided, but we still replicate this ceremony. And so after Archie had passed away, we came to the community of Round Lake, and Betsy was there. And I remember thinking, I have no idea who's going to be talking for this ceremony for Archie's family. Because he was, in our culture, the older you get, the more important you become. I think we can learn a lot about worldviews when we really look at languages. And so our word for an elder, Gitchiaya'a, it literally means great being. Our word for an elderly woman, Mindumuye, means one who holds things together and describes the role of the family matriarch. You don't really have to say respect your elders in our tribal language. It's built right in with any word you could use to speak to them or about them. And so Archie, even in his 90s, I remember thinking at first, why are they making him talk? Why are they making him sing? He's old. They should give him a break. But he was the most important, great being in the room. So he did so much of the talking. So I'm driving there thinking, I wonder who's going to be talking. I got there, and Betsy was, instead of a kiss on each cheek, she came right up to me and she said, I bet you're wondering who's talking today. I said, yeah. She said, it's you? I said, what? She said, well, you've been following him around for years now. I'm going to find out what you learned. And she had a line of people who had requests for special prayers and different things. And she said, you're going to talk for all of them. And I'll be listening. My dad never forgot anybody's native name and never forgot what they were asking for. Pressure. I pulled it off, and she gave me one nod. And after that, I ended up being pushed into doing many of the things that Archie did. So today, I too officiate at our traditional funerals and life ceremonies. Life ceremonies include many things, and we have a rich cultural tradition. It amazes me, not what we have lost over the past 500 years, but what we still have. That our tribal language still lives, that our traditional funeral rite still lives, that these teachings and customs for helping families through grief still live. That is pretty amazing. And in some ways, the story we tell is very important because we can either aggravate the injuries, hold on to fear and judgment, or we can celebrate all of the lives lived and all of the gifts shared that are still going. And that framing makes a big difference. So there's more to share about this, but I want to push on and talk about a couple of other things during my time here as well. So a couple minutes on me. There's home in the center of northern Minnesota. It's one of the colder parts of the United States. It's beautiful. And my relatives have been buried in the same place longer than America has been a country. So it is very hard to do the very American thing, which is sell the family farm and move to California. In fact, one of the defining features of being Indigenous is the connection to place. And because of sustained connection to place, you have a different sense of community. Now, all of those things are under pressure for us. Half of our tribal population lives off reservation. People fall in love with all kinds of people, make babies with all kinds of people, move to cities, do all the things all the other people do. But we still have these distinct communities and customs. And there's a growing, resurging interest in these things. This is someone from my family tree. He was very close to the human record for longevity. He was born in the 1700s. He died in 1922. He was in our area before there were any white settlers. He was still there after the soldiers returned from World War I. Amazing to think of the changes he saw in his lifetime. Also, one of the travesties of American education is that I went to school, kindergarten, 12 grades, and learned all about the beauties and wonders of the world and great Americans, and never once was taught anything about my people, the first people of the land. And it had many effects. All of us humans have been affected by colonization and the idea that we should take one language, culture, and religion and use it to supplant the others. And we have damaged one another so many times with these thoughts. I do think that Switzerland is doing better than many nations at saying it's okay to have 4 official languages. And it's okay to learn one another's languages, even if we gripe about it a little bit. That this is in part respect and support, and that really the test for democracy as a way to structure a country will not be decided by one group's ability to colonize the other, but by our shared ability to not just tolerate, but celebrate our many differences. America has a lot to learn from you about that. Some pictures of my father, who is not Native American at all. He was born in Vienna, Austria, an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor who spoke nothing but German for the first 13 years of his life. He has an amazing story, and I won't be able to share all of it with you tonight because I want to stay focused on our topic, but eventually he and his mother made it out to England. A year later, made it to America. Eventually his father joined them. 2 cousins made it out. Everyone else was killed in the camps. My father was the only one from this large family that had grandchildren, the last of his line. Eventually, he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. My mother grew up in our ancestral village, 400 people. Half of them are my cousins. And for her, harvesting wild rice, hunting, fishing, was less a cool cultural pastime and more a necessary means of survival. She only met one professional Native person ever, her whole childhood. That person was the school nurse. And she thought, well, maybe I can do that. She went on and got a nursing degree. It's one of the most honorable professions. One of her first jobs was working for our tribe's health program, including vaccinations, helping elders, and even work in palliative care. As she was doing this work, she thought, wow, our people are really getting pushed around. I'm going to do something about that. And she went back to school, and she got a law degree. She was the first female Native attorney in the whole state of Minnesota. So when I was growing up, I watched her. She was the only woman in court. She was the only Native person in court. And among other things, that told me we can do stuff. And I think it inspired a sense of possibility. My father was restarting his life when he was meeting my mom, and my mom was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. There were humble beginnings. Here's me as a kid. We had a little house with no electricity and no running water. We would buy milk, tie it on a string, and sink it in the creek because there were springs and it kept it cool. We had a hand pump and an outhouse. By the time I hit middle school, my mother had her law degree and built a nice house. So I saw big changes in my own time. Here's some pictures of Archie when I was getting started with him. That's him with the Dalai Lama. This is a side story, but they kind of look like they could be related. Brown, bald, and glasses. But he was brought to the Conference on World Religions. Both of them were, and the Dalai Lama wanted to meet Archie because he was the oldest spiritual leader there. So there were a long line of monks coming to bow, and Archie had never seen anybody bow. He had no idea what to do, so he started patting everybody on the head. That's okay. That's all right. It's taboo to touch the head in the Buddhist tradition. That's a sacred vessel, so they stopped the line. How do you greet? I don't know. Shake hands. So the Dalai Lama goes like this. Archie says, no, like this. So they got an arm wrestler handshake. Cute. For me, it has been a rebuilding journey, and I could show you this one picture first. My grandmother passed away just several months ago at the age of 98. She had a pretty good run. Like many Native children in the United States and in Canada, she was taken from her parents at the age of 5 and sent to a residential boarding school, forbidden to speak our tribal language, and it was a pretty terrible experience. But she made it through there and made it back to our home community and married a local boy and started her family. And so my mother grew up with a bit of a break in the intergenerational transmission of our culture. So my journey with Archie was kind of novel in our family, relearning our tribal language, rebuilding around some of our cultural practices. And I think my mother did a good job of bringing me to ceremonies and making sure that I was exposed to these things. But it's been very heartening now, seeing what is happening with my children. My oldest daughter now, who I vowed to only speak our tribal language to at home, is a good speaker of Ojibwe, and she even works on a team of people translating our elders and publishing books in our language. And so it is heartening to see that it is possible to break the cycles of trauma, historical trauma, and poverty, and all kinds of other things. It is possible, and it is happening. We just need to scale it up. These are my children. It's a big, beautiful, blended family, 9 kids. Yep. My wife's here in the middle. She's actually from the Swedish American tribe. Somebody's getting along. But we learn a lot from each other. There's the view of home. I live in a rural area, lakes, forests. So among things that happened when my parents were getting started, they acquired a piece of property, but it didn't look like this. It looked like this. Originally, it had been a pine forest, clear cut, turned into farm fields. So they started planting trees. They planted all of the trees in this picture. It transformed the landscape and the ecosystem. Just a couple of people. Of course, they had a child labor force. Today, when we look at climate change, politics, race relations, or what would it take to have truly equitable and healthy communities? A lot of us think, oh, it's overwhelming. I'll just try to be a good person, and I'll tell my kids to be good people, and I hope it's enough, but it's never quite enough. All that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems that humans have made for thousands of years and move the whole mountain right now. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform the entire landscape and the ecosystem. In many ways, this is the work that everyone in this room is doing. Planting the seeds for what it could look like to have a healthy understanding of death and dying and grieving, and a healthy way to deal with it individually and collectively so that we can improve everybody's life. I think most humans would have similar ideas about what they would wish for their children. I know I would like my children to have a long, healthy, happy life. What do they need to have a long, healthy, happy life? And it's not always obvious, aside from food, clothing, shelter, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, tier 1, if you're familiar with that analogy. So we try to do these things. We harvest wild rice, which is a grass that grows on the water. We harvest the seeds with sticks, poles. We make maple syrup and sugar. We hunt, we fish, we gather. I try to get as much food as I can that is not dumped full of chemicals from Monsanto Corporation. But we don't do all of it. If I hold up my finger and say, "What is this?" I might start a fight. Unless we clarify in what language, because in the language of body parts, that's a finger. But in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, that's up. So who's right? Of course, they're all right. It's a matter of language, context, perspective. Oftentimes, we have very different ideas about death and dying and many other things. But we would do well to take all the people we want to give a good talking to and give them a good listening to. I'll mention just a bit about who the Ojibwe are, my tribe. It's quite complex trying to understand all of the nuances of an entire group of people. In America alone, there are now 574 federally recognized tribes. And they are different from one another and have different historical experiences, cultures, totally different geographies, and different kinds of food. Right? So we don't all have the same experiences. The Ojibwe are a large group, and I'll briefly show you a map. Here in this kind of green area, you see the Algonquian speaking peoples. There are 29 different tribes. We're closely related to Ottawa, Potawatomi, Cree in terms of language and culture. And it's a bit beyond the scope of our talk to bring you into everything on the tribal culture. But I will be around for the full conference. And we're selling some of my books on the table, and I have cards, and I'm happy to stay in conversation with all of you if you want to learn more about these things. I wanted to put in a couple disclaimers before sharing kind of death and grief teachings, which are that, first of all, in our tribe, there's even diversity within our tribe. And I can tell you what we do in my family and community, but by no means is this how every single family does it everywhere in our space. Just like if someone's from Switzerland, that doesn't guarantee you that they are Catholic or Protestant or atheist or agnostic. You have all of these and many other things. And so, as we think about this, I think it's important to say I'm just sharing a little bit about some of what we do with my crew. Here's one of my elders, Anna Gibbs, and to me, she exemplified some of the things we are dealing with, a tension between cultural continuity and cultural change. A fluent speaker of our language, a full-blooded Native woman, and at the same time, this part is cultural continuity, but she was also the first woman in her community to officiate at traditional Ojibwe funerals. That had been a male responsibility. So she also represented cultural change. We have patriarchy issues in our cultures too. She's holding my last-born daughter. This picture is about 11 years ago. One of the things that I think a lot of people are struggling with now is thinking that spiritual things must exist somewhere far away from me, and if I can only find them somewhere, or find someone who can connect me to it. And we're so busy searching out there that we forget to look in here. Connection and culture live inside of us, and we all need that. There's a lot in our cultural toolbox. I just give you a brief slideshow of some of what we do with my children. We love to fish. We love to hunt. We teach children from an early age about the handling and processing of animals and production of food. There's my mom again. In 2020, at the start of the pandemic, we lost my mom. And there were a couple of dimensions to this story that I would like to share. And I'm going to come back to her narrative if I have time to share a little bit of something that I went through in the grieving process. I think one of the injuries we experience when we lose someone includes how we wrestle with judgment, thinking it was my fault, I should have done more, I should have done different, I should have spent more time, and we re-injure ourselves with these kinds of thinking. And so I did a lot of learning in my own experiences with death and grieving too. I mentioned a little bit about our traditional ceremony where the officiating crew sits with the family and the ceremony is for the departing. We will tell people, like in our creation story, the Great Spirit took a clump of earth and infused it with light, breath, and sound. And when we pass away, that little clump of earth goes back to earth, but our unique light, breath, and sound goes on a journey. into the spirit world. And so that's who the ceremony is for. Even if someone died in the woods and no one did any ceremony for them, the spirit would separate from the body and they would go on their journey. What the funeral rite does is it gives them a map and a compass and a little push in the right direction. Unlike the Abrahamic religious traditions, there's no concept of heaven and hell. We all go to the same place. So it removes judgment from death. And I think this can be quite liberating. We build spirit houses like this, where the body is set, and we only keep them up for 4 years. After that, we let them deteriorate and go back to nature. Our emotional connection to our bodies takes a little time to fade, but eventually we just think of people as the ever-living spirit that they truly are. In the next couple of minutes, I just wanted to mention a couple of teachings, and then if we have time for questions, will there be time, or am I going to run up against the clock? You just let me know when we get there. But in any event, all of us as humans, we all need connection, belonging, and love. In fact, we survived as humans when there was a saber-toothed tiger or a cave bear. Not because we accumulated more food than the person in the next cave. Not because we outcompeted them. We survived because they loved us and loved us enough to intervene and protect us from the saber-toothed tiger or the cave bear. It's in our DNA to need connection and belonging and love. And I think one of the things, when you boil that down, it brings you to a more communal way of structuring societies and connecting with one another. All of us have had an indigenous experience as humans. Until 10,000 years ago, we all lived in villages. We all harvested food together. We all had earth-based worldviews. And we dealt with death publicly and collectively and communally. This has been shifting and changing, and in part, with colonization, I think we have started to emphasize individual accomplishments and achievements, competing with others. How many board games or sports do we have where nobody wins and nobody loses? We've become so materialistic. All of those things are at odds with our core human needs for connection and belonging and love. And as a result, we are struggling in dealing with death. Now, colonization is about taking one language, culture, and religion and using it to supplant all the others, and often about using violence to achieve that end. But when you solve your problems with violence, it makes a whole bunch of other problems. Now, why would we think that all of the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems can be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? Well, they can't. They can't. And so we have to dig deeper. Even our religions are busy fighting with each other, competing. Even though there's a lot within the value systems that speak to other things. And so one of the things to remember as we embark upon these conversations is what Lila Watson is saying. Helping one another or helping a marginalized community, that's not an act of charity. We all need liberation from these colonial ways of thinking and doing things. I will share a copy of this PowerPoint with anyone who wants it. These are just links to a couple of other resources that might help you get more information. I'll mention that I have a YouTube channel with free videos about our tribal culture and things like that, and there are lots of books and other tools and resources. I was pretty amazed. This group of elders in Mille Lacs said, you know, we want to do something to strengthen our culture and our ways. And it was pretty remarkable to me. They had a significant amount of money from tribal businesses that they'd put together, and they built new books for kids, Rosetta Stone for our tribal language, and at the launch event for some of this work, one of the elders over here on the left, he was a veteran of the Vietnam War. And during COVID, his sister died and his brother died. And I thought he would get up there and say, this was the hardest time of our lives. And he said, you know what? We've been through a lot. But they did so much. And when I look at all the young people coming around, how hard we're working together on healing and helping, all the things we've been able to build, I think this time has been the happiest time of my life. When we help others, we receive healing ourselves. And as we embark on these conversations and efforts, it's like what Carl Jung shared, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. A friend of ours, this is my mother with Louise Erdrich, who just won the Pulitzer Prize for her latest book. And I think she had some powerful things to share about death and dying. I like this quote especially, even though it's long, and I will wrap this up in just 1 minute here. But life will break you. Nobody can protect you from that. And being alone won't either, for the solitude will also break you with its yearning. You have to love. You have to feel. It is the reason you are here on earth. You have to risk your heart. And as a side note, any one of us who has loved anyone, we know that to love is to lose. Someone will pass away first, but it's worth the risk, and it's worth that pain. You are here to be swallowed up, and when it happens that you are broken or betrayed or left or hurt or death brushes near, let yourself sit by an apple tree and listen to the apples falling all around you in heaps, wasting their sweetness. Tell yourself that you tasted as many as you could. And I'll leave you with this. Every spring, we take our family out into our sugar bush, where we harvest the maple sap and condense it down into maple syrup and sugar. We have a custom in our family when a baby is born, we take the placenta, the afterbirth, and we bury it by maple trees. And so in the spring, we go out and the kids are there making offerings next to the trees where their placentas are buried. We often have 5 generations in our family represented. And we are rebuilding the connection between generations and our cultural practices about death and dying. And there's much more to share about everything we tell families on how to deal with grief, and I'm happy to share more of that. But for now, I just want to close by saying thank you to all of you for coming today, for embarking on these courageous conversations, and I'm sure that they will bear a lot of fruit. Miigwech, merci. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we'll take a few questions. Just wave if you want to ask a question.
Yes, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Did you want me to share a little bit about what we tell the bereaved family when we're doing a funeral, about teachings? I could do that, maybe summarize briefly. But we will tell people that, first of all, you're not alone. That everybody is sharing collectively in this loss. We'll tell people that it's just the body of your loved one that goes in the earth. Their spirit lives forever and goes on a journey, and we explain the details of that. We will say, now that you've had this loss, your life will be different. And so we actually have people gather up the clothing of the person who passed away, and they give it away rather than holding on to it. We encourage people to rearrange their house because their life will be rearranged. We tell people that there are healthy ways to deal with grief and unhealthy ways, and to pick up the healthy ways. We say that our Creator and the spirits around us will be watching you very closely during the whole first year of your loss. And so what we do shows the spirits how our life will go. So if we are drowning our grief in drugs, alcohol, other addictions, then it sets a template for how life can go. But if we seek out our family, make extra efforts to be kind, play board games, visit, that this will show the spirits how we want things to go. And we will tell people, get up in the morning. Your spirit is strong in the morning. The sun can dry your tears. The scientists are starting to catch up with our elders. We do need sunlight. We'll tell people, your loved one loved you just as much as you love them. And so they would want for you to have a long, healthy, happy life. The best way you can honor them is to do your best to lead a long, healthy, happy life. There's no way around grieving. You just have to go through it. It'll always be there, but it will get lighter and easier to traverse. Seek out ceremonies, and so we'll send them to the drum ceremony that I had mentioned that Archie's family was going through. And we'll tell people, seek out our elders and even our veterans, people who've experienced death in a different way. They have a different kind of wisdom and can advise and counsel you. We have medicines we give people. They make a tea out of cedar and can drink that and even use it to put it in the bathtub and take a bath. We have another one with the bark from a popple tree to drink for cleansing some of the grieving. We tell people, we use tobacco not as a pleasure smoke, but as an offering. So when we ask for something, we give something. And so we'll tell people, take tobacco and put it by a rock or put it by a tree or put it in the water. Think about what you're grieving. Allow yourself to feel that and then release it. And you may have to do that many times, but it will make it easier to bear over time. We have protocol things. We'll tell people your grief is powerful. And so rather than pretending it's not there, we say if you're having a hard time, come on in and talk about it. And together we will share the load. It's almost the opposite of what mainstream teaches. Turn the frown upside down, pretend it's okay. People don't pretend to grieve, they pretend to be okay. And so we say, talk about it, and we help each other. And go on with life ceremonies, and there are many of them, and so we explain about some of them. When our traditional foods come into season throughout the year, we have a special feast and feed them a little bit symbolically taking off a little bit of grief with each feeding throughout the year. So there are lots of to-do things. But I think each of them help, and then each of them requires somebody to ask somebody to do the feeding for them or come to play the board games, and it reinvigorates the sense of community, which I think is an important dimension to healing with difficult experiences. So that's a little bit about some of the teachings about dealing with grief. Questions? We got time for maybe one or two. They'll tell me to quit when I'm done. Don't be shy. There's one.
Mon anglais n'est pas bon, alors je vais vous parler en français. Mais vous nous aviez dit que une personne d'âge mûr, âgée, était complètement accomplie et qu'aujourd'hui, il y avait cette tension entre la tradition et puis la poursuite de la tradition culturelle et qu'aujourd'hui, il y avait même des femmes qui accompagnaient les rites funéraires. Mais quand un enfant meurt, il n'est pas encore accompli. Ou un jeune adolescent, qu'est-ce que vous proposez dans ces rites funéraires aujourd'hui et dans cette tension entre la culture d'avant et la culture d'aujourd'hui? Et en même temps, aujourd'hui, les jeunes ont accès à... Enfin, ça, c'est une deuxième question. Non, mais déjà la première question.
Ah, merci. I need a translation. I should have used the earbuds.
Yeah, I can try to do it. So to retranslate that, I was not here at the beginning, so I've not seen the beginning of the presentation, but it seems you have described that all people are quite accomplished. They have been through their life, and when they died, in a way, something has been fulfilled by their life. But the question she focused on is now, what about these newborn? The young people who die, and what you do around this, and how to address this dimension. So we had a question, but
yeah, great question. And there's more to share. You know, in our worldview, there are 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. They correlate to 4 seasons in a person's life: babies, adolescents, young people, adults, elders. And we hope that everybody gets to see all of their seasons. But that doesn't always happen. And that doesn't mean that someone is incomplete or less than. There's no judgment about that. At the same time, it does pose a special challenge, because we want everyone to see all of their seasons. So when there is a miscarriage, when there's a stillbirth, when a child passes away, these are very difficult things to grieve. And we do have additional ceremonies for those who've experienced, intense grief. And also, if someone has been with a partner for, many, many years, it's a major rearrangement to life. And so there are additional ceremonies for healing when people need it. And so those are on request, and some of them are really quite involved. And I just think it's important to reiterate that it's not like someone is less than if they didn't get to 100 years. That's the wish. That's the goal. It's aspirational, and hopefully something we can all do. But in our way, too, there are many things that impact our lives. So, on the one hand, if somebody decides to drive the car 100 miles an hour and gets into a car wreck and hurts somebody or themselves, that doesn't mean that God wanted it that way. So we are impacted on the one hand by our choices, good and bad choices. We are also impacted by luck. Good luck, bad luck, blind, random luck. Today, there are many people who are starving. And it's not because of their bad choices. It's because they were born into a part of the world where there isn't enough food. So, again, no judgment. And then also, we do believe that the Great Spirit has a plan or hope for us. We get glimpses of it when we dream or when we go fasting and have a vision. These three things are choices, luck, the Great Spirit's plan. They're like strands in a braid. And we are impacted by all of them. Sometimes when somebody has a loss, there's a temptation to say, why did God take my baby? But that's not the only force that's affecting you or your baby. And also when things go well, it's not just because God's on our side. There are many things that can affect us. And I think that helps balance out the thinking. We want it to be simple. And we also often, when we grieve, as part of the natural grieving process, we have disbelief, we have anger. When we get to anger, we want to blame somebody. Whose fault is it? And sometimes it's not anybody's fault. And that's harder to work through to get to acceptance. But sometimes it is not anybody's fault. Good question. Yeah.
Bonsoir. Pardon. Bonsoir. Sorry. So my question was about people who have a variety of emotions and not especially not good ones, but not easy ones, as well as grieving. For example, resentment or things that you just did not get to into this life. And how would you suggest to deal with that, especially in a context of maybe more atheism and more loneliness to some way, or a sense of community that is a bit diminished, I would say?
Yeah. Yeah, it is true. And this is something that all of us, aside from our individual losses, collectively, our communities have really kind of disintegrated. And the more connected we've become through technology and other things, the more disconnected we've become from the people all around us. And so some of the natural fabric for catching us when we go through a loss, it's harder to find. And so I would say this, there's such a variety of experiences and cultures and people that, even for us, there are Ojibwe people who aren't living in their home community and have a sense that community is something I have to drive to find. But community is also what we create. And if we wait for someone to fix all of the historical injustices and everything else, we will never really wrangle the grief. And so it's important to build and create community, and that can happen in many, many different ways. Looking at the agenda for today and for the next 4 days, there are people who are going to show us examples of that, creating community through theater, through the arts, through conversation, in many different ways. So it's not a cop-out, but it means we have to do a kind of work that maybe our ancestors 10,000 years ago didn't have to do as much. But that work can be very healing for us and everyone we connect with, and can be quite a gift for the next generations as we show people what that can look like. And sometimes people have heard a little bit about my story and said, what? Your father was a Holocaust survivor. Your mother and grandmother, went through all these genocides and residential boarding schools and whatever. It must be awful. I'm like, I love my life. I see all of those things, and I see the injustices and the unfairness of so many things in the world, but I also see its beauties, and we are more than the sum of our tragedies, even though we acknowledge our losses and face our pain directly. It takes some work to process those things, and it's still honestly ongoing. I have moments when it wells up, my losses or things that have happened even in previous generations, and I feel hurt and upset and bothered and angry, and have to remind myself to cycle through the healthy tools that we have been given or have to create to deal with that. Yeah, so there was one here and then one over there. And then, I need to quit. Okay. Yes. So honestly, all we are doing today is starting a really good conversation. And I will be around for 4 days. I'm happy to visit with anyone anytime. I'll make sure I have some of my business cards if you want to email or call on the table by the books, and I'm sure that we can continue the conversations and many, many others. You've been amazing. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, resources for the Ojibwe language, teachers, and more. Miigwech.